everyone. Good evening or good afternoon or good some other hour of the day, depending on where you are. It sounds like we have guests from all over joining us, which is great. We're excited to have you. This presentation is going to be a case study about our accessibility audit, which is an audit of a major nonprofit website. I'm going to go over a quick agenda just before we do intros. We're going to talk about when and why to do an accessibility audit, what we learned from doing an audit, how we're moving forward, having completed the audit, and then, as Katie said, we'll have Q&A. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Adam Kapp. I am coming to you from outside of Washington, D.C. in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is the traditional homeland of the Piscataway people. We like to do native land acknowledgements at our organization as part of the welcome. To describe myself, I am a person wearing a white and blue dress shirt. I'm sitting in a black chair, and there are some green plants and some framed art prints behind me. And I'm the Director of Digital Product Management at the Sierra Club. Laura, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Laura Patch. I'm a Digital Product Manager at the Sierra Club. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a female with brown hair. Today I'm wearing a black shirt and red jacket, and I've got a bookcase behind me that's secretly a bed. And I am coming to you today from Walnut Creek, California, the land of the Bay Miwok folk.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jesse Browne. I use he, him pronouns. I'm on the edge of Takelma and Shasta country, which is in what we call Southern Oregon now, in a little mountain town called Ashland. And I'm an Australian man presenting to you from a little white room with a green plant in the corner. I've got a green shirt on, and I look like I've been stuck inside with two small children for about a year. But thankfully, my glasses hide the bags under my eyes pretty well. So I'm happy to be here with you.
Thanks both, and also thanks for the reminder. I use any gender pronouns. I forgot to include that in my intro. A little bit about the Sierra Club, for those who may or may not be familiar. The Sierra Club is the most enduring and influential grassroots environmental organization in the United States. It's on our website, so it must be true. We amplify the power of 3.8 million members and supporters to defend everyone's right to a healthy world. To start, I'm going to talk a little bit about, from our experience, why or when you might choose to do an accessibility audit. So the headline that you see on this screen is about a case that obviously many of you are probably familiar with, about the Supreme Court handing a victory to a blind man who sued Domino's Pizza over their website's accessibility or lack thereof. This case was Domino's v. Robles. And this was something that we had been tracking in our organization as it started making its way through the system. So this wasn't a surprise to us, but it was definitely, this headline was from October 8th, 2019. But it was definitely a reminder, a bit of a wake-up call that we wanted to maybe move ahead a little bit more quickly or with more urgency than we had planned previously. We wanted to set a target, and as I said, this kind of galvanized us into action a little bit. We had been thinking about writing down our accessibility goals, and in conversation with the development team, the product team, and others, we set a target of meeting the WCAG's AA standard. We also had a bit of an accessibility fail. We had recently worked with an agency on a rebranding project for our website and our organization. Unfortunately, as we discovered in an implementation phase, the color palette that they delivered wasn't fully compliant with the goals that we were setting. So that added to the sense of urgency. So just to look at that timeline a little bit, that new relaunch with new branding and colors that I mentioned happened in November 2018. In March of 2019, we had created an initial list of potential partners for the accessibility audit. We ended up, coincidentally, working with DQ, and we had a kickoff call with them in September of that year. A note to no one will be surprised, especially if you work at a big organization, that the contracting bit always takes longer than you think. Certainly the case for us. That Supreme Court decision came right as we were getting our accessibility report delivered, or right around the same time. And at that point, we had also formed an internal accessibility working group, which started meeting. It was in December of that year that, as a result of that audit, we had internal conversations about the new brand colors not meeting contrast requirements and decided to make changes. And then in sort of the first quarter into the second quarter of 2020, we were doing A/B testing into those new colors. Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of doing an audit?
Sure. The audit helped us find items that we had missed the first time around when we implemented the new brand. It also helped us jumpstart our accessibility practice, because it was something we could go to folk outside of our direct team and say, hey, here's some issues. It helped us decide on a target and objective for our work around this and plan how to address accessibility issues in the future. It required a lot of internal conversations, which I think is true about most nonprofits. You have to make sure that everybody buys into it. But now, as we raise additional ideas to improve our accessibility and not just address issues, we have that buy-in already because of this work. For choosing a vendor, there's 3 steps that we kind of followed in this process. The first is to reach out to your network and see if they have any recommendations. I had been working on getting a certification in accessibility, so I had some contacts that I helped during this process. Adam also had additional ones. We got people's recommendations, and that helped us narrow down to a couple of vendors. We met with 2 vendors and emailed with a 3rd one. Those meetings really helped us talk about our values as an organization and see if those vendors aligned with those values. One of the items that we talked about was making sure that humans were doing testing and not just automated tools, and that those humans doing the testing were users of accessible assistive technology on a regular basis, so that they really could experience the issue as they might in their day-to-day lives. During the consultations, we noticed that a fair amount of vendors were also using that Domino's case as a fear-based reason to do an accessibility audit. They kept talking about how we were open to being sued, and that felt like it was coming from a wrong place instead of aligning with our values of we want it to be accessible so that everybody could use our website. So that was an important conversation during those vendor meetings.
All right, and Jesse, I think, is going to talk here about some of the results from the audit and changes that we made.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Laura. So yeah, hi everyone. So I'm a web developer. So when the audit phase completed its first step of analyzing all of our properties. We looked, I think the audit ran across maybe 3 or 4 of our web properties. We're a big, old, messy organization, so we have a pretty big, messy catalog of different web properties. And for us, this covered sierraclub.org. It also covered our magazine site, which is sierraclub.org/Sierra. And it also covered 2 other Salesforce-powered tools, one that we use for advocacy alerts and another to send a petition to a lawmaker or legislator or whatever. And it also ran against our fundraising forms, like our online donation forms. So we found a lot of issues, and DQ, who is our auditing partner, they have this feature where you can import their findings into Jira. One day I had 200 tickets to fix, and I'm the developer who it came to. I was like, oh, cool, we did this accessibility audit. We found 200 problems. They're all in Jira. Fix them. And it was framed more politely than that. But, that's essentially what it was like for me. I was like, oh, cool, 200 things to fix. So I think we found around 190 of them. We haven't fixed all of them, but we've fixed most of them. 44 were identified as critical. We fixed all of those. 132 were serious. As it says on the slide there, 50 plus of those were elements that didn't have a sufficient color contrast between mainly the font of text and the background color of a button or something like that, or maybe like an alert that spread across the page, and the contrast ratio wasn't sufficient to be visible for people with maybe vision impairments or whatever. So that was a bulk of the work was in our color palette. I was pretty happy we were able to fix all the critical ones, but we weren't able to address all of them for various reasons, which we'll go into in a minute. But I definitely, if you're ever the developer who ends up on the end of one of these to implement it, I definitely recommend not reading them all at once on the first day, and just split them out into categories and focus on the critical ones first, and then work your way through them in whatever manner feels good to you. But certainly splitting them out into categories helped me, and not looking at them all at once was a good thing. And we can probably go to the next slide. Thanks, Adam. So we also had a lot of problems with images, like not having alt attributes or having titles and stuff like this. So for any developers that may be watching today, feel free to steal this and use it. This is a pretty hacky fix for images that don't have alt tags. So for context, we use on sierraclub.org and sierraclub.org/Sierra, our magazine property and our flagship website. We use Drupal for our CMS, and we were reluctant to force our content creators to always put in a value for an alt tag, because A, they just wouldn't do it anyway, but B, we also have quite a lot of pages that are formatted like a feed, where you maybe have a teaser with a thumbnail image and a short description and another one, and there might be 20, 30 of them rendering on a screen. And so if you imagine someone with a screen reader trying to pass through that, if every single 30 images had alt text in there every single time, it can result in not a great user experience. And so one of the fixes for this was to just have the attribute there but not have a value in it. And so I was like, well, why don't we just, after the page is loaded, just run some JavaScript to just crawl through every single image on the page, and if there's no attribute already defined, we'll just slap one in there with an empty value. And my boss was like, that's not going to work, but it did. It satisfied the requirements as far as the suggested fix that the audit provided for us, and it was programmatic, and we were able to implement it in a few minutes across the thousands of web pages that are hosted on those sites. So and if any of you are developers and are looking at that and going, oh my God, that's an awful way to do it, you should have done this, feel free to tell me in the Q&A at the end of this, because I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to figure it out as I go. I'm not a subject matter expert, I don't think, but I've been working on this stuff for a while. And so you could also take that snippet and use it in anything that was not Drupal if you just took Drupal out of the first and the bottom line, and it'd work on any web property. So that was how I handled the alt tags, and I was able to find a few kind of hacky programmatic things like that when the markup structure was the problem. But a lot of them came down to contrast of colors, and also like focus elements was another big thing. So we can probably move on to the next slide, but I guess the whole point of that last one is just have a look at all of your issues and prioritize whatever low-hanging fruit you can clean up with a programmatic solution that can solve a lot of your issues with a minimal technical lift. So once that, I tried to do it that way first, and then once all of the easy stuff was done, I was like, okay, now we've got to really look at these color things. And so you can see in this grid on the right, the way we solved our color contrast problem, and for context, if anyone is wondering what I mean, the color contrast ratio has to be 4.5 to 1 to meet the AA accessibility standard, and a lot of ours were at about 3.8 to 1, which was okay to meet the A standard, but as organizationally, as Laura mentioned earlier, and Adam too, we decided we wanted to meet AA. So our current color palette didn't do it, and so from my point of view as a developer, I was like, okay, cool. I was like, give me a couple of hours with it. I'll see what I can do. And I just took all of our existing colors, and I just made the ones that didn't meet the ratio requirement a bit darker, a bit darker, a bit darker, until they finally just met the requirement and looked okay. And I was like, okay. Took maybe, I don't know, a couple of hours, an hour or two, I don't know, not that long. So then I had a new list of colors that mapped exactly 1-to-1 to the old list of colors. Some of them stayed the same, some of them got a bit darker. And I was like, okay, we just need to change these colors to these. This still looks fine. And we can be done with this in about an hour, you know, to push to production and have it just work. And that would have been awesome. And if you ever have the opportunity to refactor a color palette, I strongly recommend doing it with a 1-to-1. Even if you change some of the colors, just like whatever you have in your existing palette, keep the same amount of colors and replace them with some other color. That would have been great. I could have implemented it in about 10 minutes. The whole thing would have taken about half a day. But that's not how it went at Sierra Club. At Sierra Club, the colors mapped 1-to-1, went to our design team, and they said, no, not good enough, we're going to change it. And I was like, really? Please? I could have this done like by the end of the day. And they were like, no, we're going to change it. So we, on the right-hand column here, we have our previous color palette, which did not meet the AA standard. You'll notice there's 2 greens there. On the left, we have our new colors that we have rendering now across most of our properties. And there's only 1 green there. And there's a couple of other changes too. In the new palette, the tangerine is gone completely. And we have 3 different reds now instead of 1. And so what this meant for us was, instead of just a simple 1-to-1, like change 1 file, recompile our CSS and just push everything to production, we had to basically go through the way all of our different colors we used. We had to change button colors. We had to look at different hover colors, and it was like, and it was a bit of an ordeal, and it took 4 months. A few weeks to get all of the changes right, and then back and forth approved and blah, blah, blah. Yuck. Hope I never have to do that again in my career. Hope you never have to go through it. So if anyone ever tries to put you in that position, feel free to send them a link to this recording afterwards and say, look, they had to do this and it took them months. It could have taken a couple of hours. So anyway, I can laugh about it now. It's all good. But it was a lot more work than it needed to be. and generally speaking, our organisation accepted it pretty well. And yep, we can go to the next slide. So that's definitely a good. That was, for me anyway, from my perspective, that was probably the biggest inefficiency in the way that we handled the results of our audit, and it was just an internal thing. And yeah, ideally, if you're ever doing a rebrand, hopefully you'll just get the color palette right in the first place and won't have to refactor it a year later. And we can bump to the next slide. And oh, there was one other thing. I thought there was a mention of vendors. Anyway, I don't have a C slide for it, but there were some things that we couldn't fix everything on. And is that, if that's in a different slide, I don't have to talk about it?
Yeah, Adam, go back a slide.
Oh, did I miss it?
There you go.
Oh, sorry, it is there.
Oops.
Yeah, there were some things we just couldn't fix. And mainly the things that we couldn't fix were in third-party vendors' code that I didn't have access to. So most of the things in our audit that we couldn't fix were because the code lived somewhere else. And that might have been like a Facebook like button that was rendered via an iframe that I couldn't get a focus element on it to work. And if any of you developers in the audience have solved that problem, feel free to hit us up in the Q&A and let us know how you solved it, because I never got a good solution for that. We also have, like, use a third-party service called Add This that has all our social share buttons, and that's rendered from an external server that I can't control the code of, and I could never fix a lot of the issues there. And they were mainly around like having like visible enough focus indicators or color contrast ratios there. So they were the biggest challenges we had, and there are unresolved issues. So that was my part of this story.
So our goal is to make sure we don't need to do such an in-depth audit again, and hopefully save Jesse and his colleagues some work on an ongoing basis. We've implemented some processes to help with that. The first is that we're doing an annual accessibility review. As Jesse mentioned, we have a lot of properties and a lot of large sections. So we focus on one section in an in-depth review per year, and then also check representations of the other ones to fix anything that's happening there. We use an automatic tool for that, as well as some of our own testing by our team as opposed to an external vendor. We also established an accessibility working group. These folk are working on accessibility within their own job roles. They become ambassadors for daily work, and they're learning about accessibility and taking that out to the rest of the organization. It's an important way to make sure that people understand accessibility is not just up to your development team. It is a work that everybody has to do. We've also made sure to follow any updates to the web content accessibility guidelines. We have a point person for that to share any changes that happen and when timelines of those are going to be implemented, so we can start working on anything that needs to be adjusted to meet those updates. And finally, we build accessibility into every aspect of our organization. An example of that is we've started having closed caption at our all staff meetings. We really want to make sure that people at Sierra Club are living the values of equity, inclusion, and justice, and that includes accessibility outside of digital. Adam has also led some conversations about thinking about humane tech and human-centered design as we build new products or web pages.
Great, thanks, Laura. Yeah, and so much of that, kudos to Laura for really spearheading a lot of those initiatives within our organization. But yeah, it is something that we take seriously, and if we want to solve some of the pressing problems that our organization works on, we, for many reasons, want as many people as possible to be able to engage in that movement, to see themselves in the movement and feel welcome in the organization. And our accessibility work is certainly one way of trying to promote that. Some other just sort of, I guess, lessons learned or tips to pass along here. If you're using a content management system, we had some conversations internally about, I think certainly content management systems have some advantages in terms of data structure that can be helpful for accessibility, but there might also be some pitfalls. So just understanding what your content management system is or is not doing in terms of, having the right fields or things that you need is a conversation well worth having. Also, as we sort of indicated here, a big lesson learned was in working with vendors and agencies to really understand where they're at on their accessibility journey. What knowledge do they have? What past experience and ability do they have? How familiar are they with the best practices? And to agree on an accessibility standard, which I think honestly was part of the problem initially with that vendor, is just being sure that there's probably some contractual language that spells out what your accessibility standards are, and that they're expected to meet them. Laura, do you want to talk about some of these tools and resources that we use?
Yeah. So as I said before, we really view accessibility as something that not just the development team is responsible for. So there are some tools that check your code, like Axe created by DQ. Wave and Lighthouse are also useful for checking a single page to see if there's any issues on that page. I recommend using a color contrast checker for if you're creating new documents, PDFs, or just a new web page. That is something that anybody can use. It does not have to come from your design team or your development team. The Hemingway app is really useful for checking your readability. People tend to get into business speak or write long paragraphs on digital properties. The Hemingway app will check what your reader level is for the content you've created. So that's a good one to share with your teams that are creating your emails or other documents. And then the Ally Image Check is a tool that we use so that if you have text overlaying images, which can usually create a problem for contrast issues, you can see if the image works with that overlaid text. And that's, again, a really good one to share with your content creators, as they're the ones frequently picking the images as opposed to your development team.
Yeah, that's a great point, Laura. And, as much as I think in a perfect world, we would never, ever use an image, as text, especially not in a meaningful way. There are still people in the organization that will sometimes go that route. So I think that last one especially is a good tool to know. One other thing that I just wanted to mention here. So we did an experiment. We actually had a summer intern essentially working with us, paid intern, of course. This was, I think, certainly wasn't last summer, so I think it must have been the summer before. And they put together an experiment, for many of us who don't rely on assistive technologies in our daily lives or haven't maybe had experience with them just at some point in our lives. It was a really interesting experiment to bring that technology, into a workspace. So we kind of did this as a bit of an informal, we sometimes call them lunch and learns, where, it was opt-in for people, but, we used non-visual desktop access, NVDA, which is a free open source screen reader, which is owned and distributed by NV Access. And we allowed people to interact with various pages on our website using this tool so that they could really understand, really what the experience was like. And, that was something that we hadn't done before as an organization. And I, personally found it really illuminating. And, to Laura's point about trying to bring accessibility work throughout the organization and not just have it be the responsibility of the product team or the developers or the creative team, I think this was a really great exercise just to get people thinking about that experience. That is everything we had prepared. So I think at this point, we're ready for questions if there are any.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Laura, Adam, Jesse, for sharing your experience with your audit and your remediation plans. Before we get to the questions, I want to share just a couple of items that were put into chat that are pretty cool. So one person said, with a number of likes here, that they loved the introduction of your surroundings. They said they hadn't experienced that in a webinar before, and they really appreciated how you guys described yourselves and your surroundings. So thank you for that. Another thing in chat I wanted to throw out here, Sally says, thank you for being raw and authentic about knowing what you don't know. She says, many of us don't know, which is why we are here. Accessibility is a process and not an easy fix. So authentication was very much appreciated too. So great job there. All right, getting over to the Q&A. A number of great questions out here. The first one I think we'll start with is somebody wanted to get back to the why. The why you guys decided to give accessibility the attention. You talked about the Domino's case and the Supreme Court, but what was the underlying reason that pushed you guys to really start working on accessibility and making it a priority?
Sure, I'll address that one, but Laura or Jesse, please feel free to jump in. Our organization has been undergoing, we're 128-year-old organization now. And really I've been with the organization 15 years. And even, just in the time that I've been here, and even a shorter window than that, we have really moved from an organization that was really just focused on the conservation movement, a lot of things people know the Sierra Club for, preserving public land, those kinds of things, to a much more intersectional approach, understanding the connections between racism and environmental justice, with environmental preservation, understanding how our work intersects with workers' movements, and really, our journey to becoming a more equitable and inclusive organization has definitely been a long and winding one, but it's something that increasingly we have been trying to show up for and take ownership of. And I think that was really ultimately what drove the focus on accessibility. I think if you asked us, 6 or 7 years ago, that issue would have been responsive design, because we knew that, the ability for anyone to access our web tools on a mobile device was really important, because that was the primary way that a significant subset of the US population was accessing the internet at all, and especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And then as that kind of became more part of our core practice and people understood the value in designing mobile first, for example, we started looking at the next frontier of how we could become a more inclusive organization online. And I think to us, that really, we zeroed in on accessibility as being an area where we had some ground to make up and could also have an impact.
Awesome, thank you. I have a few questions here that are more related to what Jesse was covering. from a coding and a programmatics perspective. So one of the questions here is from Carol, and it was about the empty alt text solution that you had shared. She wanted to know, how did you verify that that solution provided a good user experience for everyone?
Thanks, Carol, for the question. To be perfectly honest, I implemented the change, and then I analyzed a bunch of pages with the Chrome extension Axe that DQ built, and it didn't flag the problems anymore. So I closed the ticket and said, it's all good. I'm not sure that's what I did. Maybe it wasn't enough. I don't know. But that's what I did.
What I will also add to that, honestly, is that a lot of our images are
decorative.
Yes, thank you. That was the word I was looking for.
That's what I was
going to
think.
A lot of the images are for decorative purposes. They're not conveying information. So we felt comfortable that they didn't need to have alt text. Whereas if they were images that were really conveying information, we would make sure that it did have the text that people could discern on screen readers.
Perfect. Thank you for that. That makes total sense. I have a Drupal question in here as well, and Maz is asking, would you recommend switching to Drupal? Were there many limitations when trying to implement accessibility features?
Thanks for the question, Naz. I feel like that's a really hard one to answer without knowing what you're on now and why you're thinking about changing. Personally, I think switching or migrating is always pretty gnarly and a lot of work. And so I would just really carefully consider why it is you need to change. Because changing to anything is a lot. We were already using Drupal when I was hired, and we were already committed to it as an organization. So I wasn't a Drupal developer before I came to work here, but I guess I sort of am one now just because I've had to learn it. And I don't think there were many limitations in Drupal that stopped us from solving problems, and Drupal actually comes with a lot shipped out of the box that already is accessibility friendly. Drupal's already pretty far along just with a default install. So it does come with a lot out of the box, and that's really helpful. And then it's with structure, it's how you configure it. You can certainly configure it in a way that will not meet a bunch of guidelines, but like with our image things, there might be good reasons to do that sometimes. So I certainly didn't find anything in Drupal that made it difficult or impossible for me to implement a solution. But yeah, just bear in mind, if you're thinking of migrating over to a new CMS, it's going to be a ton of work, and I would focus on like, whether do you really need to do it? And if you do, then yeah, Drupal's a very powerful and a very deep tool, as you can use it out of the box quickly, and you can customize it about as much as you could ever want to. So.
Very good. Thank you, Jesse. Let's see. There's a question in here about how you're handling PDFs that are posted on your website.
I can't speak to that.
I will start, and Laura, please also, as I said, jump in. But I think my immediate reaction to that is that where possible, we try to work with our content teams and our program teams to maybe discourage them from a lot of large scale posting of documents and things via PDF on the website. Unfortunately, I'm sure that there are times where it happens. I think in that case where as we become aware of it, we just try to reach out to them and understand, what the function of that document it is, what need is it really serving? Is it just a case of them maybe not having resources to create or update a web page that would convey similar information in a way that's more accessible? I think that's my first thought. Laura, do you want to add anything to that?
PDFs are something that the accessibility working group has kind of tried to address on an individual level. I did a presentation training for the Sierra Club on how to create more accessible documents, whether it's your Google, Microsoft, or PDF documents. It is, I think, still one of the areas where we're still training both the design team as well as content folk to create more accessible content in that aspect. I find personally that our designers go back to not checking contrast ratios on PDFs a lot, even despite the new color palette.
All right. Let's see. We have kind of a general question here about compliance monitoring. So once remediation is complete, how do you keep the accessibility level of the website? Who's monitoring it? And is there some protocol or compliance policy to post content or to keep an eye on things?
I think what we've settled on, which we touched on just a little bit in the presentation, and part of this is us here just being real about, what our level of resources is and the extent to which, what we're able to do versus what we would like to do. And I think what we've settled on for now is that obviously any issues that sort of are flagged to our website help email inbox or sort of come directly to the developers or to the product team, we can escalate those. And usually if they're minor, we can deal with them easily. But in terms of like our monitoring, it's really more of an annual exercise. And, we tend to focus on areas of the site that have had significant changes or that we maybe just haven't looked at in a little while. We know that it's not exhaustive. It's certainly not perfect. But we are trying to do the best that we can, and we continue to make the case to advocate for this in the organization. And I would love to have more resources to be able to do more wide scale automated testing or more human testing in certain areas. So that's aspirational for us, I think. Laura, did you?
For new products, we've also made sure that in project charters, there's an accessibility component that's written out. So we don't launch any new products that have been tested for accessibility. We build that into the product development.
Yeah, great point. I would say that we just try to catch it more on the front end, through design and then training. But I'm sure that there's some stuff that's happening over time that we don't always catch.
Well, and thank you for that. And where you guys are at, you are in an awesome place. I mean, you recognize that you want to test your digital properties for accessibility. You know what the current state is. You've worked on remediation. And the fact that you don't currently have like a governed monitoring process, it's okay. I mean, accessibility is not a project, right? It's a long-term program that takes a lot of time and resources to build. And you guys are taking a lot of the very important steps to do that. So I would pat yourselves on the back with where you're at with that.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I think we all definitely view it as a practice and one that, never has a finish line. So it's just about keeping the drumbeat going and trying to grow awareness of the importance of this work in the organization.
Yep, definitely. All right. Here's a question about one of the tools that you had talked about, Laura, the accessibility image check. They are wondering, is that an app or where did they find that?
It is a website. I believe it's actually called Ally with the 11, not L's.
A11Y, okay.
Yes, image check. And you upload the image and you can position the text as it will appear. If it's something that you're embedding in a PDF, to go back to that question, you can actually change where the text is so that that's how you should design it for your PDF. If it's for your website and where the text is going to be, you should place it that way, and then you can move the image around to see if it fixes the contrast issue.
Okay, thank you. And then one more tools related question is about Hemingway. Somebody here is saying they don't see Hemingway in the App Store. Is that the actual name of the app?
It is also a web page based. It's called Hemingway app, but it's not like a app you download to your phone.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, we have a few more minutes here, so let's see. Carol is asking if you could share more details about your annual accessibility audit and whether it counts for different kinds of assistive technologies beyond those that are geared towards non-visual users.
I can take that one. So we've only done it once since our big audit, so it's still a in-process element. We run the automated tools on a couple of different pages within a section. So if, Jesse mentioned that our magazine had been a portion of our website that we included in the original audit. So we do something similar to that, where we pick a couple of different page templates that are used and run the automated tools. Those are very good at flagging visual items. And then I do an audit of those pages to look at some of the accessibility issues that affect people with mental disabilities or cognitive issues. The Hemingway app, again, is like one that I use for that, to check that reading level of what those pages are presenting. And then the things that the automatic tools check usually go to Jesse and his team, because those tend to be code issues. Whereas the stuff that I find, I try to go back to the content owners and see if I can get them to adjust their content accordingly.
And if I could just add one thing, one of the other things that's been really helpful for us, a lot of our properties, all actually not the magazine one now, I think we're rebuilding it to be powered by this, but the other 3 properties we tested are all powered by Bootstrap. So we were able to use the screen reader only class to put a value in, or the screen reader only attribute. That functionality in Bootstrap helped us solve a lot of problems as well, because it's not rendered on the screen or anything, but it targets screen readers specifically and can put valuable information there that was helpful in solving a lot of problems for us.
And maybe just in terms of if that person was asking, some of the other stuff, again, is just a little more, we try to do preventative. We tend not to, as a development product team, really recommend like a lot of use of some kinds of distracting motion or other things that we sometimes do get requests for, just because we know that those can create problems. So I guess we mostly also try to steer around some of those issues.
That makes sense. All right, I think we've got time here for one more question. You guys up for one more?
Absolutely.
All right, let's see. This is a great one. They are wondering, do you have multiple content creators for your digital presence? If so, how do you ensure all content meets accessibility needs ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely do. We're an organization of just about 900 staff. And in some cases, we also have volunteers who are generating content. So the short answer, which probably won't come as much of a surprise, is that, again, it's front loaded. We try to sort of set up the content creation user flow to address some of those issues. And we try to do some training, and we try to sort of talk about accessibility to get people thinking about it, but we aren't always, reviewing every piece of content that comes through our workflow for perfect compliance.
One of the things that I'm working on is creating guidelines to help people create more accessible content. So I created a document about how to write alternative text and why it's important. So as people add images, they have best practices in front of them. And that's an ongoing process.
And I, hopefully in the future also, that there had been some discussion, but I think as we grow a culture of accessibility, and as that culture sort of grows across organizations and in different places, also just sort of having, rather than accessibility sort of being an add-on or, something that we're sort of bugging people about, but that it does sort of become baked into everyone's core competencies, that anyone who's a content creator, because those people don't report to us, to any of the three of us on this call, but that the people who are supervising them and their managers are all bought into this and are all able to provide coaching and feedback to those people as well. So that's still a little ways off in our journey, I think, but ultimately that's, I think, part of how we scale this up, if that's a way to think about it.
For sure. Yep. Education, training, top-down support, all those things. Makes sense. All right. Well, we are at the end of our session here. So Laura, Adam, Jesse, thank you so much again for sharing your story and fielding these questions. We appreciate you. And thanks to all the attendees that have joined us today. As a reminder, the recording will be available on the session webpage following AXCON. Enjoy the rest of AXCON, guys. Take care.